Hello, everyone. I'm Brett Kinsella, and this is Gain, the Generative AI News Rundown. And we're back, and this is the 50th episode of Gain. It's hard to believe that we've done this. We have done it every week sometimes, and sometimes we've had a week or two off, depending on what schedules. And actually, it's been 3 weeks since we've done this. So we normally have a lot to cover, but we have even more to cover. You saw that list that was coming up at the top. We've got Microsoft with Inflection. Obviously, that's an interesting story, but we haven't even talked about the Claude 3 models from Anthropic. We have to talk about Google and Apple working together. OpenAI has had a number of announcements, including some new reports about GPT-5, although kind of knew that if you listened to the Lex Friedman podcast a few days ago. But in any event, there are a lot of stories. There's new funding rounds, there are new products, and we're going to get to all of that. And helping me go through the generative AI rundown is going to be Eric Schwartz from VoiceBot.ai. Hey, Eric.
Hey, glad to be back.
So, Eric, you look surprisingly well rested, and I was thinking the fact that you just became a father about what 3 weeks ago now.
4 weeks on
4
Monday.
weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, and that actually almost perfectly aligns with our
Yep.
last generative AI news rundown.
Yeah.
You've been busy, I've been busy, but tell us a little bit about the news.
Yeah. No, I'm very, very excited, very happy to announce I have a new son. His name is Orion, like the constellation. He's a fantastic little man who is growing like crazy, and definitely going to be testing out all of the all the AI tech for kids on him. He'll be my little guinea pig on that. But no, it's a lot of fun, but it's definitely, as you can imagine, slowed down my output of stories a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, best to you, to Rachel, the mother,
Yes.
and Orion. We're all very excited about that. It's an era of innovation in LLMs, an era of innovation in your household. This all goes
Yes.
together. And just like we're going to run the gauntlet of LLMs today, you're going to run the gauntlet of infancy, which will be fun for you. Um, so let's get right into it, everybody.
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited to have this conversation. I've had so many private conversations about these things over the last couple of weeks, and glad to have it here. Now, everybody, this is Generative AI News Rundown. You know all about this. If you are on YouTube or LinkedIn, just hit the comments section and say hello. Let us know you're here. Let us know where you're coming in from, and ask questions, make comments. We'll incorporate it into the show. Really excited to have the perspective of some of the most erudite observers of the space join this conversation with us today, and most weeks when we get together on this. So definitely do that. Also, like on YouTube and like in LinkedIn. Looking forward to hearing from everybody. Okay, great. So let's get started. First story. Oh, you know what I need to do? I need to actually find this thing. But actually, let's just start out, and you'll be able to help me with this. And this is before we came to the Microsoft scenario. Actually, Inflection did a pretty interesting announcement about a new model.
Yeah. Inflection's been, even before the big like business side of the news, they've been pushing out quite a lot of technical updates and advances, and that includes Inflection 2.5. It's a company that started out with not planning on a LLM centered business model, but they've been rapidly upgrading the one behind their Pi chatbot, and now Inflection 2.5 is based on the studies that they released, the tests and everything. It's really at the level of GPT-4 in a lot of ways. Better in some than what OpenAI has on offer, and even compared to its previous iteration of Inflection 2, it's a big step up, and it really has a lot because Inflection has its own like different approach where they try to really emphasize the empathy, as it were, and the ability to understand the meaning behind what people are saying. It has some really impressive results in that regard. But it's a sign that despite how sometimes the headlines look, it is more than just a contest between whatever OpenAI puts out and whatever Google makes. There's more foundational LLMs to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, so there's a couple things that I think that are interesting to talk about here with Inflection. So you mentioned the EQ aspect, And I think EQ is sort of interesting. And they're saying, hey, we had EQ, so empathy is the word they use, but it's really just this idea that it actually has building effective trust, has personality, and that is a little bit different than what we've seen with the others, which are really just focused on the logical or what we think of as cognitive trust aspects. So they're saying, hey, we already had EQ, we're adding IQ. And they positioned it as almost as good as GPT-4, which I think was a really interesting narrative. And in many ways, they could have just said better than GPT 3.5, given that GPT 3.5 is actually the most used model out there. But almost as good as GPT-4. I wonder if some of this I wonder if some of this stuff was going on in the background already, and they were trying to position it like, oh, you might have an alternative here, Microsoft, that you could leverage.
Yep.
There's another thing that's really interesting, and I talk about this too. We could talk about the good enough threshold another time, or maybe just a little bit later. But on Inflection specifically, they also announced that they had 6 million MAUs, 1 million daily active users. And one of the things that I said in my coverage, I was like, okay, so there's some things here that this isn't terrible, but it's not like Perplexity with 60 million monthly active users, or ChatGPT with 200 to 300 billion. Like, so it's not as big of a deal is that. But I did notice this session length, 33 minutes, right? And so that I thought was really, really important. And that got me thinking a little bit about the conversations I have with people. A lot of them think of all of these different solutions, whether it's Gemini Advanced, formerly Bard, ChatGPT, Character AI, Grok, Inflection's Pi. They think about all these things in the same way. And so I actually just did this really quick breakdown and said, hey, if you think about all these, they're all kind of different. There's obviously overlap, but we have this idea, and for those of you listening later, I'll just explain it to you. We have this scale we call Generative AI Assistant to Companion Spectrum, and it's like productivity on one end and entertainment on the other. And we have this thing sort of in the middle. We've got ChatGPT, the general purpose assistant, and then we have the virtual companions. And so they're the flip side of the same coin. They can do a little bit of both, each of them. But perfect examples of these are really ChatGPT and Pi, right? Now, Character AI also does that, but that's like the productivity to entertainment scale. Character.ai, which we're going to talk about later, is really on the entertainment side. It's these virtual characters, could do virtual companions, could do a little bit of general purpose assistant stuff. But I always think about where they focused. What's their user base focused on? And so Character AI at the entertainment end of the spectrum there's their focus, is the opposite of like Perplexity, or in even this way, the Microsoft Copilot, because they're the specialty assistant. It's for search, it's for research online. And so we have these different types of things, and Pi and Grok are kind of in the middle. They're trying to decide whether they're a virtual companion or they're a general purpose assistant. And so I thought that was sort of an interesting thing to say, but so that people could think about how these are all different and why Microsoft might be thinking about this differently than Copilot. Because if Copilot's a specialty assistant at the top end of that scale towards productivity, and Pi is closer to that virtual companion, that might be actually kind of interesting for them as an alternative that they can bring to the market. In addition, there's some other things which we're going to get into, but I thought that was interesting. And I also, just the fact that they put these numbers out around how much Pi is being used. And I looked at it, I said, you know what, it's good. If I was a startup, I might think this is good, but I've raised 1.5 billion, not good enough. And we said last year on a Generative AI news rundown in June that when Inflection rolled out their API access, we said, what's the purpose of this? We don't get it. Like, who asked for this? There's so many options out there. They acted like all these companies were asking them about this. And the fact is, nobody was asking for this. In fact, I've had a request in for the company I do some work with since December to get access to those models. No response from them, right? I've even done some back channel. They're like, we're not ready. So that's really interesting. But let's get to the topic that everybody actually cares about. And that's the Microsoft deal. And I was really glad, in some ways I was glad I was too busy to write about this the moment that it came out, because some more information is emerging.
Yeah.
And so Microsoft did a deal, I think, as most people know. Well, why don't you tell people what the deal is, and then I'll sort of talk about my contextualization of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. This is at the intersection of several trends and stories, but at its core, Microsoft has, depending on how you look at it, semi-acquired or poached two of the co-founders of Inflection AI, Mustafa Suleiman and Karan
70 employees.
Yes, and 70 employees, and essentially put them in charge of Microsoft's generative AI, literally calling him Suleiman as the CEO of AI, but with a specific focus on the consumer side of things. So the kinds of chatbots and products that the Copilots and so on that Microsoft offers, and that's really sort of gutted what Inflection was doing, and Inflection now has a new CEO and has talked about how they're going to be sort of a generative AI studio. But at the same time, Microsoft has made a deal to license for, I think it was like $625 million to bring Inflection into Azure. So really, again, semi acquiring, or really just making it so that if you want to use Inflection, you're going to be directly or indirectly going through Microsoft, which makes sense since Microsoft was leading the $1.3 billion funding round for Inflection not too long ago.
Well, maybe not led. I think it was actually Sequoia and Nvidia that led that last round. But still, they participated in both of their rounds. 2 years ago, a $225 million deal.
Yeah, it was a co-leading,
$1.3 billion. Yeah, last year. So so they were a big part of it, and so there's a few different things in here. So obviously, this is an unusual deal, and that's what I wrote about. I think it was yesterday, recently, and it's an unusual deal because they're basically taking the whole team with a small leftover group that's doing this. And really, my point here is, go back to the top, really is how OpenAI's former board inadvertently created a new competitor inside its Patron, right? And so Microsoft being its biggest, because what happened was, if people just go back to November, if you were paying attention to this stuff, OpenAI was going through a meltdown. They fired Sam Altman, Greg Brockman quit, a bunch of other engineers quit, and then 700 internal employees of a company with fewer than 800 total employees said they're leaving if Altman doesn't come back. Satya Nadella was trying to be the peacemaker in here, and then when that broke down, he said, "Hey, why don't you guys just come work for Microsoft?" And actually, they even set up an office in downtown San Francisco with 700 desks ready for them. This was in 48 hours. It's amazing. He announced this on X, and he said, "Why don't you guys come over? You'll just run it inside. You'll have to start over, but not really starting over, because you guys already know how to do this." And then everything got resolved, and Nadella just sort of stepped back and said, "Great, we have our partner." But people don't forget. They're two things happen. One is oh, I had this risk. And they are very dependent, and at that time even more dependent on OpenAI. So they had this risk. But also, when you think of these new ideas, he's probably thinking, well, this is going to be great. I'm going to have Altman, I'm going to have Brockman, I'm going to have all these amazing engineers, and then I control it. It's inside my house. It's not a partner that I own 49% of with a weird board structure that could do anything at any time. And so that idea lingered. And I guess there's probably people like Microsoft's board member, Reid Hoffman, also a co-founder of Inflection, that also remembered this really cool idea that could happen. And so it just lingered.
Yeah, there's a lot of back channel, the personality story here is in its way almost as fascinating as the business and technical element. And the analogy, or the phrase that I see a lot of reports using, is that Microsoft is eating Inflection, but I think your way of putting it is more accurate. It's not that they're eating it; it's that they're creating it within themselves. They're taking in the best, or basically all of Inflection, and infusing it with everything that they're already doing, including everything they're bringing to the table from OpenAI. And again, Satya Nadella has been very, the last couple of years, just seemed to go from triumph to triumph. And even when there was a huge crisis at OpenAI, he came out looking fantastic, because it seemed like he had a plan in place to deal with the crisis if it hadn't been resolved the way it was resolved. And now he looks even more prescient in terms of having been, with Microsoft being one of the people in one of the companies investing in Inflection to such an absurd level. Again, helpfully that Reid Hoffman and Satya Nadella surely have ways of reaching each other without any intermediaries.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It smooths everything over. And again, now one of the potential major competitors, as you say, is now just another member of the Microsoft extended family of generative AI. And I know we'll get to Nvidia later, but if you're not talking about Nvidia as the biggest success story so far with generative AI, I think Microsoft has to be at or near the top of that list.
Yeah, I think Nvidia, OpenAI, Microsoft are sort of the big three. And I'm showing right now on the screen some data from IoT Analytics, and they estimated that as of December, OpenAI had 39% market share. That's direct to OpenAI, 39% market share for large language models, the large platforms, or basically for generative AI based on language models. Microsoft had 30%, so Microsoft was only second only to OpenAI. But in fact, of that 30%, basically 90% of that is OpenAI service through Microsoft. So that gives you a sense of maybe the 68% market share that OpenAI had. But that could go away instantly. And right now, Microsoft has double the market share of AWS and Google, and this is really part of the cloud wars right now. So this is like really important to them. And so why would they basically hire a bunch of people from Inflection, pay Inflection over $600 million to basically pre-license so they can sell Inflection? It's basically to protect that 30%, maybe grow it, not be totally dependent on OpenAI. And I think that that's sort of the interesting thing, is that this idea persisted. And then when they had this chance, because he has the personal relationship with Reid Hoffman, he was able to then say, hey, let's do something creative. And I also just like point out to people who are thinking about like Mistral is in Azure as well, and Meta is. So you're not going to do this type of deal with Meta. Like they're not going to give you any engineers. Maybe you could have done it with Mistral. But frankly, I can't imagine this deal happening in the EU and EU regulators not looking disapprovingly on it. So it's almost like he's just like, oh, this is like the perfect storm.
And there's the other element, which is that part of the point of that huge investment, the 1.5 billion, was that Inflection said they're going to build the biggest GPU cluster ever, like just really focusing on really invest in building out that facet of things, which talking about Nvidia is obviously hugely important. And now Microsoft wanted to be in on the ground floor of that project, and now they are that project essentially. So it's another future big win for them. It's it's going to be interesting to see how the other not just Google or Meta, but the other Anthropic and so on, how they're going to react to this, because Inflection had seemed like it was simultaneously earlier than a lot of what came later in terms of generative AI chatbots when they first announced Pi, which got the kiss of death phrase of no changes right now to it. But now it seems like very clever, nimble pivoting has put Reid Hoffman and the others, the other founders, in a really good place going forward.
Okay, so to close this out, those are all great comments. I appreciate that. To close this out, a couple things. So first of all, I would say that this, like OpenAI, is not going to be that impacted by this, at least in the near term, because they have a lead, and we're going to talk about some other things that are going on there in a few minutes. It makes a big difference to Microsoft, and in my LinkedIn post about this, I talked about option value, and they needed an option value that if OpenAI goes south, or if they just need to control something, having Inflection potentially in their back pocket is good. I'm not convinced that Inflection's going anywhere, but I do think there's a high likelihood that the company will be acquired outright by Microsoft at some point this year. And because they already have the team sort of building stuff internally, it won't slow them down if there's a regulatory inquiry about it. So I think that that's like one thing that I'm considering. And I think importantly, from Microsoft's strategy standpoint, they had the one pillar in November. It was really OpenAI or bust. And then they were starting to they were tinkering with small language models. They had some partnerships, but those weren't that serious. More recently, they've done a deal with Mistral. So they're starting to do this third-party pillar. And then now they've got an internal pillar with the team led by Suleiman. So I think that's like really important. Plus, Microsoft would like, I think, a consumer play, and this is a really good way for them to backdoor into a consumer play. Like, welcome back Cortana, maybe.
Yeah, and calling him a CEO is I think fascinating. It's
Well,
it
yeah,
implies a lot of
it's
what.
creating a new division
Yeah,
that it gives it an authority, and it's a really good point. It gives it an authority that it wouldn't if he was just like an SVP of this new department.
yeah, and probably comes with promises of more independence than might normally be the case.
Yeah. And so, just like another quick side point, CoreWeave is probably a big loser in this because they were doing a lot of the training for Inflection on CoreWeave, although Azure as well. But I think that's all going to Azure going forward because that's probably where what the money is. The money is probably in the form of cloud computing credits, or at least a significant portion of it. Although a lot of that money actually that they're putting in is just going to go to investors. So the existing investors, whether it be Nvidia or Sequoia or Reid Hoffman, or Bill Gates. Bill Gates, one of the original investors as well. So if you think about inside baseball here, they're going to get either 1.3 or 1.1 of their original investment plus keep their equity, which I think is then going to be acquired. And so they're basically going to get 1.3, 1.1 plus they're going to get that again. It's going to be like a 2 to 3x on their money before this is all resolved.
Yeah, I feel like Reid Hoffman could be like, and this is the power of those LinkedIn connections.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Hey, folks, this is the Generative AI News Rundown. And shout out to our producer, Andrew Herndon, Pi-crosoft. Let's sort of bring that up. That was his idea. It's like, is it Microsoft or is it Pi-crosoft? I thought that was sort of fun. All right. So let's keep going in LLM madness because we had our friend Elon Musk in X.AI. And there are a lot of people at X.AI that are not Elon Musk. So we should probably give them credit as well. They're pretty formidable in their own right. But in any event, there was always this talk about Elon Musk saying he wants open source and he left OpenAI because of that. And then he does a lawsuit, and yet Grok, the model that they relaunched in September, is not. It's actually a closed source model until about a week ago. And the original Grok model, the Grok 1 model, they have a Grok 0 as well. Grok 1 model, pre-trained, not fine-tuned to like the Grok assistant level, but basically a pre-trained model. Now available, open source, Apache license, not an open model like Meta. Meta, it's like sort of open source, but it's got some restrictions, so it's not truly. But this is an Apache 2 license. It's a traditional open source. I think this is really fascinating. Now we have Meta with Llama 2 being this open model, and I think that's the leader. Even we've got Mistral, which now has a mix of proprietary and open source models, but definitely making waves. And we've got Grok, open source. It looks like a big step up for the open source community.
Yeah, it's an interesting combination of technical news and again the business side of things and the sort of again the personality story, because it's simultaneously behind the scenes there's lawsuits happening between Musk and OpenAI, and even more than most cases, there's going to be deliberate comparisons between what XAI is doing with Grok and what's happening with OpenAI. So it was interesting that they put it out as open as they did, even though obviously not literally open source, but it is bigger than GPT 3.5. It's not quite at the GPT-4 level, but it does have enough size that those who, for whatever reason, don't want to go through OpenAI and Microsoft or through Meta can at least put together applications and projects with it. And there's other elements to it. The Musk is very keen on linking his various companies together. So there's he stopped allowing other generative AI companies from scraping X accounts, and now Grok will of course have access to that. And there's ways of training it that are supposed to be different from how other companies are doing it. There's just potentially it is potentially a very big deal, but it's at this point I think a little uncertain how well it can fit into the sort of open source LLM world.
I will tell you like a couple things. So first of all, with this announcement too, there's like people think like the Grok assistant came out. That's not it. It's the model, and then you could train it to be more like Grok if you wanted, or something else. And actually, Amy Stapleton had a good point on this. She said, in some ways, it's better that they just basically did the base foundation model, because then you can make it whatever you want, as opposed to like there will be no like API wrappers around Grok like we've seen around ChatGPT, because it requires a bit more work in order to get it live. But you brought up the big point. They revealed a little bit more information. First of all, it's a mixture of experts model. We're seeing that as a key trend. And if you don't know mixture of experts, it's instead of having one big unified model like GPT 3.5 or GPT 3, it is a mixture of experts model, which is the GPT-4, one of the secret sauces of that, where it's a combination of multiple models which have domain expertise. And so the benefit of that is it tends to reduce hallucinations coming from data that's not relevant. It's also an efficiency benefit. Like, you only have to activate a couple parts of the model. If you've got a 1.8 trillion parameter model, which is what Jensen Huang sort of revealed on stage earlier this week, that the GPT-4 is, they can activate a bunch of 200 million or 200 billion parameter models, and that's just much more efficient. And a 314 billion model mixture of experts. So there's like a bunch of subset of models, and this is going to be really significant. It is a big model. And I think a lot of people are going to start using it. I think that this is going to be pretty interesting, because that Apache 2 license is going to be super popular. The question will be, does X.AI really revert mostly to proprietary? They sort of check the open source box. Or are they going to continue to do foundation models? Is the next version, is it going to be open source again? And then what's proprietary is the fine tuning into like the Grok chatbot and those other types of things.
Yeah, and there's just I absolutely believe it's going to be in the mix at various organizations and groups as they test out very different models to see what works best for them. I'd be curious to see if there is a specific vertical or a specific task that Grok 1 as a model works better than Llama or others. I would definitely want to know if there is going to be a kind of organization or a kind of task that people will say, oh no, yeah, go to Grok, that's the one you want for this, and then if you want something else, go to Llama.
Yes. And I think that one of the clear things is that if you look at like Llama 2, a 70 billion parameter model, very good and good for its size, not as good as the frontier models. And that's what we've seen. Like, so last year, what we started to see was models coming out and saying, hey, we're as good or better than 3.5, OpenAI's 3.5 model, but not quite at 4. But now we have this trend of people saying we're as good or better than 4. We first saw that with Gemini. Gemini Pro from Google was like better than 3.5, not as good as 4, but they said Gemini Ultra in their benchmarks was better. Now, granted, some Carnegie Mellon researchers came in and said, well, maybe not so fast. Maybe you're not quite as good as this, but okay, so let's say it's close. This is the new trend. Hey, a year later, because it was a year ago, a little over a year ago now, that GPT-4 came out, we're seeing that a lot of other developers are catching up. And I think it's a mixture of experts. I think it's larger training data sets. It's more curated data. And another in this is Anthropic. So they say they dethroned GPT-4. And again, I have in the Inflection story and in this Anthropic story, I talk a little bit about benchmarks and how people are cherry picking a little bit. But with that said, these are very good models. And Claude 3 is interesting because the previous versions of Claude, there was one model that people could access, and then they had a very small one, I think. But now with Claude 3, they came out with 3, Haiku, Sonnet, and Opus. This was a couple weeks ago. Haiku came out this week. And everyone's talking about this efficiency scale. Like we're talking about, it's like easier to train, it's lower to run inference, we're as good, but like there's this other value proposition there. And so I think this is really important because we showed those market share numbers earlier, and we see that, hey, OpenAI is dominant from a mind share standpoint and a market share standpoint. So everyone right now who's not OpenAI has to win we're the chief alternative argument first before they can actually leapfrog OpenAI, even if they do technologically. Just from a market standpoint, they have to become the primary alternative. And the way to do that is say, hey, we're as good or better than them, or we're better than them. And then you can start wrapping it around. And I mean, these numbers for Claude 3, Opus, even Haiku, a much smaller model than 3.5, although 3.5 Turbo actually is a finely tuned, I think 20 billion parameter model, not the 200 billion parameter model, but still like very good in terms of performance. And OpenAI and its partners, Google and AWS, I think are really well served by this as being, hey, we're now credible.
Yeah, and it's also worth pointing out the way Anthropic talks about Claude 3 and makes a point about the speed of response, and also they highlighted how it won't refuse to answer unnecessarily, like that it's better at getting the nuance in user requests and what it's asked to do. I think there's a real sense there that they're like, if you want to just have this intelligent customer service tool, like this is the one that you want, because you won't ever get a complaint about it didn't answer my question, or it was really took forever to answer to respond. It it can work in that regard, and then also have the much more powerful thing that much more powerful model that they claim is as good as GPT-4, and again, and expanding beyond that into the multimodal elements, where they say that they specifically claim that it's better than the GPT-4v, the visual version. So there's a lot of hints in that.
The multimodal models are sort of a trend right now because people want these sort of general purpose, and that's what we're really fight. Most of the fight right now is over the general purpose models, and then being multimodal being an extension of general purpose. McCall Stanislavski said comparing GPT 3.5 to Haiku is very interesting, and I think the number of, like, someone could probably correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, but I think it's basically Haiku's half the price per token as GPT 3.5. And this sort of brings me to the sufficiency standard. The sufficient, like, which models are sufficient to meet my use case?
Yep.
And if you look at all those people using OpenAI and all those people using Azure OpenAI service, the ones who are in production, a lot of them are using 3.5 because it's 15 to 20x cheaper. It's much faster. You don't have the latency issues. And so what I've been talking about with a lot of folks recently is this idea of the good enough model. We've got the frontier models like GPT-4 and maybe Anthropic Opus and those types of things. But what's the good enough model that meets my use case? And when you're talking about not just like where we are with ChatGPT and some of these like giant mega apps, but we just talk about Morgan Stanley or Nike or some other big company saying, hey, what can I use? What am I going to use this for? What am I going to automate? If 3.5 or Claude 3 Haiku or something like that is sufficient, it's good enough to meet the requirements of the use case, the economic benefits are just so much better because the cost, price, performance, the speed, all these for user experience, all these things are better.
Yeah, and I would say also, it may or may not matter in the long run, but I do appreciate that that efficiency almost seems built into, like, instead of having names that are a little generic or confusing, like what is pro versus ultra mean, the idea is like what's a haiku, what's a sonnet. You understand, like, you're getting, if you can get in, if all the information you want to transmit can be fit into 13 syllables, then the haiku is where you're going. But if you need more complexity, then you go for the full sonnet. I think there's a even if you know nothing about, if you're not technical at all, you get the idea of like, this one's small, this one's bigger.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a masterstroke where Anthropic's going to be coming into its own, a company that has benefited more than any other organization right now from the uncertainty created by OpenAI's November debacle, that a lot of companies started looking at it. And I've been doing some work with in the space around enabling organizations like enterprises to switch on the fly between models. And a lot of people thought that might be just for cost optimization or potentially latency optimization, a few other things. But frankly, most people want it because they just don't want the risk. And they might be okay going with OpenAI, but they need an alternative. And because they need the alternative, they have to test it. If it's good enough and the price performance ratio is good, then they're just like, so what OpenAI did by going through its near meltdown is they opened the door to competitors in a way that was kind of inconceivable before it happened. But is very conceivable because everybody's saying, hey, I can't afford vendor lock-in because look what almost happened there. And by the way, it's just good practice anyway. Now, along those lines, there's some news from OpenAI as well that's sort of circulating. Most of it's rumor, but some of it's not. So the first one you wrote about this. So GPT 4.5 turbo details leaked. It was basically a web page that published, which I think is sort of interesting. And then you have another story late or yesterday around GPT-5 coming. And I would say that Sam Altman on Lex Friedman said there will be a frontier model coming out this year. But why don't you break this down for us?
Yeah, so the GPT 4.5 Turbo, this was discovered on various places and shared on social media. That if you tried to look for an announcement about it, it's clear that OpenAI had written a blog post and then removed it, but there was still it was still tagged in various search engines, so you could see a little bit of the details. So it's people are really looking forward to 4.5 Turbo as the refined or better version of 4.5. So it's going to be a bigger context window at 256,000 tokens, which is double GPT-4 Turbo. It's like 200,000 words. It's going to be faster and better and so on. And it looks like it's coming very soon based on the announcements, or based on like what's seen in those search engines. But then turns out that GPT-5 apparently is also in the works, according to some of the other not just rumors, but actual reports from people in OpenAI who are anonymously talking about how it's going to come out in the summer, and that it's already being previewed and tested for enterprise customers to show them what's coming, and presumably why they should either move to or stick with OpenAI, even as we were saying, these other models are rolling out and showing some impressive results. But yeah, it seems like maybe they'll come out together, maybe it'll be one then the other, but it looks like the next stage, the next upgrade for OpenAI's models is coming very, very, very soon. And Sam Altman is pretty good at the tease in some ways, and he claimed that the news, the pace of improvements and of news around generative AI has already had its slowest year, and actually now it's just going to get faster and faster. So we may see quite a lot coming from them in 2024.
Yeah, I think that's right. And he actually talked on the Lex Friedman podcast about their approach to releases, which I thought was kind of interesting. He's very skilled. He doesn't really reveal much when it comes out. And in fact, I don't even think that we talked about Sora last time.
When leaks are very deliberate, I feel like, and you can tell because he has responses that he's clearly annoyed when there's things come out that he didn't want to have leaked, versus when he's sort of jokingly playing with people asking him about leaks that he is happy to have out there.
Okay, so and just for people, if you haven't checked out Sora, you have to check out Sora. We've both written about this. It is, and this is something that I think should tell you a lot about where OpenAI is. This is much better than the text to video we've seen other places, just in terms of its fidelity, in terms of the length, like minute-long videos to start. Now, this isn't available to everyone to use, so I'm sure there's a lot of warts on it that have to be worked out. But it was surprising to basically everyone that this could be available very soon. And this also gives me a sense that GPT-5 is going to be very good, right? Because they've been working on GPT-5 now for almost a year and a half, I think. I do expect there to be a GPT 4.5 coming up, because I think what we saw with 3.5, it's not going to be like 3.5, because 3.5 really probably should have been like a number release. It was a significant upgrade, but they did turbo. And I think there's going to be basically a GPT 4.5 Turbo, which is going to be lower cost and lower latency. So I suspect that will come out, because what they want to do is I think they want to get people onto GPT-4 off of GPT-5, because it's just like a stronger model if they can figure out a way to do it price performance standpoint. And then we'll see 5, which will be a significant step up, or we might see them concurrently.
Yeah, and there's definitely going to be an element of consumer versus enterprise there, I think, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, hey, folks, shout out to everybody on Twitter. So this is a new feature over the last couple of months on StreamYard, and we can stream on Twitter as well. So hello, Twitter people. enjoy the Generative AI News Rundown. We're usually here every week, either Thursday or Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern. And folks, let us know you are out here to let us know where you're coming in from. Make comments, all the other type of things. Mikhail Stanislav had another one here. GPT-4 Turbo is my go-to model right now. Yeah, it's so good. It is so good. But 4.5, as he said, is much needed because we need GPT 4.5, but with better price performance, I think is, and that when we get to a sufficiency level, that actually is the sufficiency line because it just takes in almost all of the applications that are being done right now are actually very good for GPT-4. It's just like, can we afford it? Does it work? So people are like, they're sub-optimizing by going to 3.5. If we get to 5, which is even better, I'm sure like a lot of that opens up new use cases, but a lower price 4 is really good. All right, so folks, and if you're on LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube, please give us a like. We'd appreciate it. Let people know that we're having this chat, and let us know what you think as well about these things. Okay. Wow, the news doesn't stop.
Yeah.
We have another one.
Yep.
And I phrase this as how Apple's discussions with Google and OpenAI could impact the generative AI market. But like the background in this story is Apple is talking to Google and has talked to OpenAI about bringing a large language model to the iPhone. And this is super important. So first of all, it basically reflects what you and I have been predicting for over a year, that Apple is nowhere in the LLM space, particularly in the frontier model space. They may wind up having their own small language models that run on device, but I just don't think they're anywhere close to having, unless they go through an acquisition of one of these big companies, they're nowhere close to having something that's competitive. And could they buy Anthropic? Potentially, but like it's going to be messy. That would get them where they want to be, but they don't necessarily have to because they're a distribution platform. And what they're looking at is they're looking at our friends from Google providing the outside the device capability, like the internet-based capabilities for large language models. Maybe that's going to be a service that gets baked into Siri. I wouldn't count on it, but maybe. And there's some background here. Apple is not looking to pay anybody for access to their large language model. They're looking to get paid. So we already know that in 2015, Google started paying Apple $3 billion annually to be the default, not the exclusive, but the default search engine on Safari on iPhone. That was very important for them to control the market share of search, or to help control market share of search on mobile. That quickly, within 2 years, escalated to $15 billion, and the last number I saw was $18 billion annually. They're paying to Apple for that right. This is really important then from a generative AI standpoint, given that Gemini is really struggling in terms of mind share and market share. It's early yet, so they've got some time to like build that out. But there's no rationale for jumping into Gemini Advanced, the ChatGPT alternative, or there is a rationale potentially to use 1.5, the 1.5 Gemini Pro model, because it has a 1 million token context window, but there's not a lot of stuff here. So they need something. And I think if Apple taps Google on this, and they're going to get a lot of money out of it, this is good, because this is going to give Google a pillar that they can build on.
Yeah, and what you said about Apple's strategy totally fits with it. And the fact that Apple has been even when you're looking at their acquisitions, it's on the sort of rather than acquiring an Anthropic or something like that. They recently acquired a company called Darwin AI, which is specifically good at working on making AI models run efficiently on devices, and that's obviously something important for Apple products. So if it can have if it can bring in someone else's LLM but have everything to make that work well on mobile devices internally, then Apple will be well placed. And what you were saying about the payments about Safari and Google, it's a reminder that the one time that Apple very publicly divested itself from a deal like that was the famous Maps debacle, where Apple Maps utterly failed when they tried to go independent from Google Maps for a while, and in the end, I feel like the vast majority of iPhone users just use Google Maps app regardless. So Apple's like, oh, why don't we just do a deal where we get paid for having these partnerships, and that probably works better for them and their investors.
Absolutely. It's going to work very well for them, I think. And the other thing is, I think Microsoft's probably talking to them. OpenAI would want money for this. Microsoft might invest, like just for Bing. And one of the reasons it went from 3 billion to 15 billion is Bing said, "Hey, I'll pay you a big check to be the default on uh, on Safari as well." But nobody will spend more on this than Google. They will outbid anybody because there's a risk that whatever generative AI player shows up on iPhone will become the default search player on iPhone. And so it is, I won't say it's quite existential, but it's super important. Okay, so we're going to move into funding fountain. You started it with the Darwin AI. We've got some other stories that you've written about that I want to get to. The first is Together AI, 106 million.
Yeah, Together AI is raking in
Killing it.
cash lately. But they're yes, we talked about the open source element, and that's what Together AI does. They do cloud services for open source generative AI models. So if you want to make something with an open source model, Together AI is a place for you to put it together and to integrate it into your own into a company's system. And they raised another little over 100 million back at the end of November. So it's really a combination of funding rounds that are going to be a big help for what they're trying to provide, which is, again, it's sort of, instead of being the model itself, they're saying, hey, come to our platform. The open source models you want to use are here. The tools you need to leverage them into something actually useful are all here. They have serverless APIs, and they claim to have more than 45,000 developers on it. It's they have a lot going for them, and I think there's going to be there are several of the major open source models already on there, and I think there's going to be more to come. And I think this is going to be its own sort of competitive space. But Together AI has a lot of runway to try to come out on top.
Absolutely, and they kind of compete with Hugging Face a little bit like kind of like Nvidia with what they're doing with the Nemo. It's very interesting. And Together AI also has the Red Pajama 30 trillion token training data set, which I think is super interesting as well. So we're going to hear a lot more about Together AI.
Yeah,
and
Hugging Face's CEO is one of the investors of this round. So
yeah, and I think that this is a potential acquisition target for Microsoft in particular, because they leaned in on the open source space and with GitHub and stuff like that. I think this might be an easier thing for them to do than some other things. You had another story about money going into a new robot company.
Yeah, this is
Robots
fascinating.
everywhere.
Yeah, this is, I mean, again, another world is Figure01 is a robot, hardware developing company, but they're very closely connected with OpenAI. And in fact, almost immediately after announcing their funding, they showed how the robot using the model behind ChatGPT could interact with people and understand their requests as interpret them as physical tasks in terms of moving objects and knowing what objects to give people. It's really good at that sort of identification and using generative AI models to make it happen. And we've seen sort of unofficial versions of these kinds of robots before, and one other more official one, the robot startup 1X, which is also linked with OpenAI. But the demonstration, the video, this is really really something, just in terms of how smoothly both the conversation and the physical task completion happens. And it's these aren't going to be rolling out at a grocery store to restock shelves anytime soon, but it's a definite indication that as and when they become cheaper to build and more and just more widely spread, you're definitely going to see hardware like this popping up in more locations.
Okay, so let's talk about robots for a second, and I'm going to come back to Mikkel. I'm going to try to hit your question about Together AI in a moment, but so Nvidia unveiled Blackwell, And this might have, in a normal week, this might have led our discussion, but it seems like
Big
so
deal.
less. The important thing about it is the price performance of training and running inference on models is coming down significantly. This is going to be 2.5 times faster than the Grace Hopper solutions, and that's probably going to come down another 8x before actually we get through the whole Blackwell chip cycle, because that's Nvidia's goal with every one of these platforms. Uh, and we could talk about Blackwell all we want, other than the fact that it's just like a new cache machine for ATM for Nvidia. I think the more interesting thing that was announced was the robot stuff. So the Groot robot platform, if you guys didn't see it, you should go look at some of the videos. Very cool. But I would say that the thing I take away from that is Nvidia and Tesla are now working on robots and have some really interesting prototypes out there. And these are two companies that can bring it to scale. Like I think of figure one, from figure one to get to the idea of capability, like we can do this, proof of concept, to getting it to like mass market production is like, it's a big stretch. Nvidia can do that from the technical component level and no supply chains. Now it knows it from the component level as opposed to sort of the end, but it could do it because basically these systems, they build like these giant computer systems, and that's kind of like what a robot does. So they can bring it to scale. Plus they have resources to bring it to scale. And if anybody thinks about like the original iRobot story by Isaac Asimov, US Robotics and
Yeah.
Man Inc. And Digital Man Inc. Like they could be that company, but Tesla also, whether it's SpaceX or Tesla, like they know how to produce things at scale that are complex and could actually significantly bring the price point down, that the application set goes really wide. So I think we've got this innovation on technology from an NVIDIA standpoint, but now we have these two giants in the manufacturing and development innovation of technology, potentially in the robot space. And this could actually change the whole future of where robots go and accelerate it to market, where I was thinking more than 10 years out, maybe within that 10-year time frame where we see this become a big industry.
Yeah, and there's also the part where, like, as we've seen through some of the, again, like either research or just unofficial playing around with what just OpenAI's models can do with little or no extra effort when plugged into a robot, in terms of the robot then understanding commands and performing tasks through the LLM. With NVIDIA obviously having put a lot of resources into new kinds of training and new kinds of sort of streamlining the LLM to hardware pipeline. I think you're right. I think it's the speed at which those robots could come out at a commercial level, or be viable as a commercial product, even though probably obviously very expensive early on, is it's you're gonna it's honestly astonishing. But yeah, that kind of sci-fi idea, the Isaac Asimov idea of a robot that at least simulates real human intelligence in its responses, seems just around the corner now in a way that it really didn't before.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're going to go into a rapid fire section before we get to winners and losers of the week. Hey, folks on YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn, give us a like if you get a chance. Make a comment. Let us know who you think the winners and losers of the week are, or comment on the other stories that we're talking about. And join us in future weeks. Follow voicebot.ai, follow Synthedia on LinkedIn and all the social channels. And follow me, Brett Kinsella. Follow Eric Schwartz on LinkedIn. We do a lot of stuff there as well. Okay, a couple rapid fire things that I thought we would talk about. So give me your 20-second take on Midjourney and Pika Labs.
Yes, so Midjourney has a new way to solve the problem of making sure that your synthetic image characters look the same from image to image, so that you don't have to constantly refine it over and over to make them look the same, regardless of your submission. So you can have the same character in multiple contexts, which is a big help for that project. And then Pika has been doing a lot of has been on the video side, and now they're going with synthetic sound as well, with the nice twist that not only can you suggest to do a text to sound submission, but the model will actually look at your video and then make its own audio if you wanted to. So looking at a video about frogs, and it'll start putting in croaking noises without you having to tell it. It's yeah, they're going to be multimodal and consistency are going to be the big next thing in synthetic media.
All right, next thing. Google has generative AI in Fitbit now.
Yep, all the Fitbit people are gone from Google, so now Google decided to actually put some new products and features into the Fitbit stuff, and that includes an LLM, a personal health LLM built on Gemini. So really putting again leveraging these powerful LLMs for more specific tasks. In this case, analyzing and offering advice about your wellness, your health in terms of exercise and sleep and so on. So, yeah, that's what people want from their devices, is to tell them how they're doing and what they can do to be healthier.
Yeah, and Michael Stanislawik says Midjourney is not quite as easy as some people make it out to be in terms of creating that. Yeah, that's diffusion models are tough to control. Better than what it was, but not basically solve the problem. I think that's a really good point, McCall. So I don't know if we put this in the bucket of Google can't catch a break or Google is its own worst enemy, but they also got fined a couple $100 million by France.
Yeah, this is. I mean, you're talking about the Microsoft thing in terms of a deal in Europe being looked at more closely, and this is a good example of that. Yeah, it's that Google had said they would do certain things and how they deployed and trained generative AI, and then it turns out that maybe they weren't actually following on a long term in terms of using news organizations, copyrighted material to do their training and so on. So it's what's impressive is not only that the authority did come down on Google and say, "Hey, you are, this is a fine." Which I don't know how much 300 million matters to Google, but they are saying, "Yes, we're taking it seriously and addressing it." But also, if this is the speed at which they respond to complaints and investigate and make their conclusions, then any tech company is generative AI company is going to have to be on its toes in Europe to avoid constantly getting in trouble for their training.
Okay, two more quick hitters. You'll take this one. I'll take the next one. ChatGPT can read aloud responses in 5 voices and 37 languages.
Yeah. So ChatGPT had previously sort of teased this and demonstrated a little bit, but now instead of just having it understand what you're saying, it'll respond back to you, and it can read multiple languages, and there's several voices to choose from. And yeah, I think this is the next step for the eventual ChatGPT voice assistant that is sort of already here and will definitely be more prevalent in the coming year.
All right, I'll take this one. OpenAI is still looking for more data that it can train its models on, which is curated data, which will make its models better, but also providing services to users. They did a deal with Prisa Media and Le Mans, so they have more French language and Spanish language news to make ChatGPT better. But the story that people are probably missing is it's also so that they have better high quality training data for future models. And I mean, kind of the good thing for some of these companies is that they will also get some revenue. And this is the thing that New York Times didn't like. They weren't getting enough revenue or weren't going to get enough revenue from OpenAI about these types of things. Okay, great. A lot happened this week. I don't know how many stories we've spread, somewhere close to 20 probably, and we did some of them in great depth. But given all the news, given what we saw, who's the winner and who's the loser of the week? What do you want to start with?
Let's start with the
loser
of the week. Yeah. Who's your loser?
My loser's Google.
Yeah.
I almost feel like I could start with it. And actually, it's a subtle thing with Google. And there's other people, like I mentioned CoreWeave earlier and stuff like that. But all of the gravity is always going somewhere else. So it's not just Google gets like bad news again, but it's just like Microsoft, again, controlling the narrative, right? To a certain extent, I think people are saying, hey, AWS is falling behind as well, or, there's some idea like they're tamping down in expectations. But like I see, I just really see that Google is really not winning in this market, and they're having trouble getting over the hump.
Yeah. I think that's fair. My loser, I know we didn't even get to that because there's so many else happening, but there's so many great advances in synthetic media, and yet stability AI seems to be just sort of falling apart internally.
Yeah, we do
Uh,
want to talk about that.
yeah, there's a lot happening, but it's just there's real trouble there. People, their actual engineering team and research teams, most of them left. I think I don't know. As a company, I don't know what their future is. Their technology is everywhere now, but I don't know if they're as a company will be still in the mix of major major brands in the space very long.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll do the winner for the week. Nvidia. All roads go through Nvidia. I think what they announced generated a lot of enthusiasm. I think there's a lot of pre-orders for that. I think they're going to be minting money for a while. I was actually presenting at a university here in the US on Tuesday to a group of graduate and undergraduate students and some faculty. And one of the questions I got is like, is Nvidia overpriced? And like, this is not financial advice, like these type of things. But I would have thought maybe a few weeks ago, it's possible. It's probably possible and likely, but based on what they announced with the robot enthusiasts and with Blackwell and what I think are going to be like huge pre-orders, like who knows? Like the whims of the market are really hard, but if you just think about the value that's being created in that company, it looks like they're going to have a lot of value. Whether that's a fair valuation of the company is a completely different story, but what they're doing with Blackwell is exactly what you would want them to do. Is it like they're taking another significant step up? They're really transforming how they're bringing these chips to market. That's another story here. But then this whole other idea that they might like have a robot line of products, I think is really significant. You?
Related to Nvidia, and again, stories that we just do not have time to get through all, but I think video game makers and players are going to be winners, are going to be winners because there's some really impressive new integrations of through in-world and character AI and so on of NPCs for games, and really making video games more immersive and making the characters in them more interesting to talk to, while at the same time, because obviously it is a technical field, there's a lot of pressure and effort to make sure that the artists behind a lot of these things are still not going to get totally cut out the way that it looks like a lot of attempts is happening in Hollywood. I think video games are going to have, I'm hoping we'll have the perfect, or at least a good mix of the human creativity enhanced with AI. And I think that's what we're starting to see come out.
Awesome. All right, folks, this is the Generative AI News Rundown. I'm Brett Kinsella. That's Eric Schwartz. We talk about this just about every week. We'll be back next Friday at 11 a.m. And I hope you can join us and give us a like on the way out the door. Thank you, everyone from YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn for joining us today. Leave some comments. Share this with other people. We really appreciate everyone coming out. Enjoy this one. Bye-bye, everyone.